centuries, whispers about a hidden sun have haunted the edges of myth and forbidden knowledge. A sun not of light, but of shadow, a source of power so absolute that ancient rulers feared even speaking its name aloud. It appeared in alchemical manuscripts, occult diagrams, and secret doctrines passed from temple to temple, always shrouded in warnings. They called it the Black Sun. To some, it was the key to transformation. To others, the symbol of cosmic endings. And behind its darkness lay the reason why priests, kings, and secret societies approached it with both fascination and terror. Across medieval Europe, the Islamic Golden Age, and Taoist China, alchemists wrote about a symbol as unsettling as it was profound: the Black Sun, or Sol Niger. At first glance, it looked like a mark of death, the end of all things. But within the cryptic language of alchemy, it represented something very different. This symbol was the gateway, the beginning of the great work, the point where destruction and rebirth fused into a single process. In Western manuscripts, alchemy appeared to be about turning base metals into gold. But this was always a disguise. The real goal was spiritual, the transformation of the alchemist's own being. The great work unfolded in stages: nigredo, blackening; albedo, whitening; and rubedo, reddening. The Black Sun ruled over nigredo, the first and most feared of these stages. Here, matter had to decompose, identities had to dissolve, and the comfortable illusions of the ego had to collapse before any enlightenment or purification could occur. Medieval texts called this the putrefactio, the rotting away of the old so that something entirely new could emerge. Arabic alchemists spoke in the same language of transformation. For them, the blackening was essential, because only after darkness came the whitening, the birth of wisdom, clarity, and spiritual light. In Taoist China, internal alchemy described an almost identical process: the breaking apart of the ordinary self so that the deeper forces of the spirit could realign and ascend. Across cultures, the Black Sun marked the threshold moment when chaos becomes the precondition for creation. Plato, in the Republic, explained that the human soul must move from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge. Through this lens, this symbol takes on a meaning that goes beyond alchemy. It reflects a truth that appears in every human life. Growth and renewal often come after our hardest trials. It is in those moments of loss, failure, or despair where new abilities emerge, and where we discover parts of ourselves we did not know existed. Accepting the presence of the Black Sun means understanding that darkness and light not only coexist, but need each other to exist at all. For the alchemists, this was the first law of transformation. There could be no illumination without first passing through the stage of nigredo, where old structures collapse and the self is stripped to its core. In modern times, Carl Jung gave this symbol a psychological meaning. He linked it to the shadow, the side of the human mind that holds the emotions, impulses, and memories we deny or repress. He summarized it in one sentence: one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For Jung, it represented the descent into this inner night. He argued that integrating the shadow was essential for the process he called individuation, the path toward becoming a whole and authentic self. This confrontation was never easy. It felt like a collapse of everything familiar, but it was precisely this collapse that allowed something new to be born. Jung recommended techniques like dream interpretation, active imagination, and symbolic meditation so individuals could face this darkness consciously. He also saw art and creativity as ideal ways to bring hidden material from the unconscious into the light. Just as the alchemists turned base metals into gold, Jung believed the human psyche could transform suffering into insight through this inner work. Life itself often forces this encounter: the death of a loved one, a broken relationship, a crisis of faith, the loss of health or purpose. These moments shatter the meaning structures that once held our lives together. People often describe this period as disorienting and empty, like wandering through a psychological night. But for Jung, this night was not an ending. It was the necessary beginning of renewal. He compared it to the alchemical black sun, dark, destructive, but also a guide toward integration and rebirth. The 10th century Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters you." The alchemists would have agreed. This is why the black sun was never just a symbol of death. It was a paradoxical light, a sun that illuminated by confronting darkness instead of fleeing from it. The alchemists insisted that the philosopher's stone, the final goal of the great work, could never be found without first passing through this inner night. They taught that even in the deepest confusion, melancholy or despair, there was a hidden radiance waiting to emerge, provided one endured the blackening instead of running from it. In this way, it became a guide through darkness, a promise that beyond dissolution lay transformation, beyond chaos lay renewal. It told every initiate the same thing. The journey toward enlightenment begins not in the light, but in the shadows you fear to face. Of all the symbols linked to the Third Reich, few remain as mysterious as the Black Sun. It never appeared on flags or propaganda posters. No surviving documents from the Nazi period explain its meaning. Yet in the heart of Westphalia, on the floor of Wurzburg Castle, this image became the center of the SS's most ambitious ideological project. Wewelsburg itself was centuries old, built in 1603. When Heinrich Himmler took control of it in the 1930s, he wanted more than a military headquarters. He envisioned it as the spiritual and ideological heart of the SS, a place where politics, myth, and ritual would merge into a new worldview. Architects redesigned the North Tower with two key chambers, the Hall of the Generals above and the crypt below. On the floor of the upper hall, a mosaic of dark green marble formed a 12-spoked sun wheel around a central disk. This was the image later known as the Black Sun. The design echoed older European sun symbols, runic patterns, and even elements of the swastika, but it remained unique to Wurzburg. The number 12 carried particular weight. It appeared in Germanic mythology, medieval legends, and Christian tradition. 12 gods, 12 apostles, 12 knights of the Round Table. Himmler's circle reinterpreted it for the SS, 12 knights or leaders surrounding a central source of power, with Himmler himself at the center. Some accounts suggest the hall was meant for ceremonies where SS leaders would gather like a modern Camelot, a council of initiates bound by ideology and ritual. The goal went far beyond politics. Himmler wanted a new political religion rooted in Germanic paganism, occult revival movements, and racial mysticism. Researchers from the Ahnenerbe, the SS Institute for Ancestral Heritage, conducted expeditions to Tibet, studied runes and medieval texts, and reinterpreted European folklore to construct a mythic Aryan past. The Black Sun, in this narrative, symbolized the hidden source of wisdom and power, said to guide the so-called Aryan race, and legitimize the Reich as heir to ancient cosmic forces. Rituals reinforced this ambition. Weddings, commemorations, and swearing-in ceremonies took place at Wurzburg. The architecture, symbols, and numbers all served to replace Christianity with what Himmler saw as a pre-Christian Germanic faith centered on race, destiny, and the Führer himself. Some SS writings even describe the sun as the visible expression of God, while this symbol represented a deeper, more esoteric energy behind history itself. But the secrecy surrounding Wolfsburg left many questions unanswered. No official SS texts define the Black Sun's meaning. After the war, this silence allowed post-war occultists and conspiracy writers to reinterpret it freely. In the 1950s, former SS officer Wilhelm Landig transformed it into a mystical emblem of esoteric Nazism, claiming it represented a hidden power source from ancient civilizations, or even from beyond the Earth. Neo-Nazi groups later adopted it as a coded replacement for banned symbols like the swastika, while modern conspiracy theories connected it to everything from lost technologies to supernatural forces. Its geometry fueled these interpretations. The 12 spokes resembled runes. Some saw within it the swastika, the sun wheel, or even a new round table of 12 initiates around a central leader. Esoteric writers linked it to Atlantis, Thule, and the idea of a hidden sun behind the visible one, a source of energy and destiny known only to the initiated. What began as a marble mosaic in a castle floor thus evolved into one of the most ambiguous symbols of the 20th century. It reflected the SS attempt to fuse political power, mythic imagination, and occult aesthetics into a single ideological system, one where architecture, ritual, and symbol carried as much weight as laws or armies. The Black Sun survived the Reich itself because its meaning was never fixed. It remained a blank canvas for fear, fascination, and speculation, a shadow cast across both history and myth. When we speak about the Black Sun in esoteric tradition, we are not talking about a literal star. We are talking about a process. In alchemy, it appears as Nigredo, the stage of total dissolution, where identity, inherited beliefs, and programmed fears collapse before any new order can emerge. Whoever crosses this inner night stops orienting their life by borrowed maps. They no longer need a church, a king, or an ideology to tell them who they are. And that is exactly what has terrified elites throughout history. Every political or religious system needs 3 pillars to keep obedience in place: narrative, ritual, and accounting. Narrative gives you the official story of why power exists and why it is legitimate. Ritual imprints that story onto the body through ceremonies, calendars, and shared emotions until it becomes habit. Accounting ties it all to material life: taxes, debts, punishments, indulgences, a whole economy of rewards and fears. The Black Sun, when understood as inner experience, short-circuits all 3. The myth collapses when you realize the sun that matters lies within, not in the official stories. Rituals lose their hold because transformation becomes an intimate practice rather than a public spectacle. And the system of moral or financial accounting loses its grip because the programmed guilt it relies on no longer works as a lever of control. This is why, historically, the tradition guarded the Black Sun behind layers of coded language, metaphors, alchemical emblems, hidden stages of initiation. The point was not empty elitism, it was protection. Protection against authorities that would crush anything threatening centralized control. A medieval monarchy claiming divine right cannot tolerate citizens who draw meaning from within rather than from its altars. A priesthood selling salvation as a monopoly has no use for initiates who can integrate their own shadow without intermediaries. Systems that govern through obedience survive by externalizing mystery and selling it back to the population in controlled forms. Look at how ancient courts handled eclipses. An eclipse closest physical mirror to the black sun, interrupts the regularity of the sky, the very rhythm on which calendars, kingships, and divine legitimacy depend. And what do rulers do? They set official interpretations, public rituals, penitential processions, performances of fear and repentance. The strategy is obvious: domesticate the anomaly. Turn a cosmic rupture into a state-sponsored drama where people feel awe, but return obedient once it's over. The inner message, that darkness could trigger personal transformation, gets buried under layers of choreography. The same mechanism appears with guilt. The black sun, as inner work, demands confronting your shadow without projecting it onto convenient enemies. It asks you to metabolize contradictions, impulses, and personal lies instead of outsourcing them to devils or scapegoats. Systems of power prefer a moral economy, lists of sins, prescribed penances, paid indulgences. People cycle endlessly through transgression and forgiveness while remaining dependent on institutions. Someone who has passed through Nigredo sees through that machinery. They no longer need moral policemen or cosmic accountants to authorize their existence. In Jungian psychology, this symbol functions as an archetype of integration. It marks the point where the self withdraws projections, stops feeding on collective hysteria, and reorganizes itself around deeper autonomy. People like that respond less to propaganda, moral panic, and manufactured enemies. A population less gripped by fear and ideological frenzy forces rulers to govern through competence rather than manipulation. From the perspective of power, that is destabilizing. It also alters the economy of desire. Social hierarchies feed on status anxiety, on people competing for titles, symbols, luxury brands, honors, and ranks. After Nigredo, desire stops chasing borrowed ideals. You work, buy, and compete differently. Status displays lose their hypnotic power. This cools down entire markets of comparison and weakens hierarchies that depend on distributing recognition as a leash. A ruling class living off that treadmill sees inner freedom as sabotage. Another tactic is co-optation. Instead of banning this symbol, power sometimes absorbs it. Kings, empires, and modern regimes take the symbol, carve it into temples or state architecture, print it on banners, wrap it in mystical language, and empty it of personal practice. Where the emblem once pointed toward inner liberation, it now legitimizes the outer order. Psychic energy that should dismantle control gets redirected into obedience and fascination. The symbol survives. The method dies. The 20th century is full of regimes that used occult aesthetics to generate awe and discipline. The pattern always repeats. Crowds stare at the emblem, but forget it once marked a path inward, not outward. Beneath this lies the problem of charisma. Charismatic power feeds on collective shadow. It dramatizes fears and desires, then offers itself as savior. Someone who has crossed their Nigredo recognizes the trick. They stop giving leaders their projections. And when the audience stops supplying its unconscious material, charisma evaporates. Leaders must then govern through real skill and integrity, always less convenient than ruling through myth and panic. None of this should be romanticized. The Black Sun does not turn anyone into a saint or a revolutionary by default. It demands responsibility, sitting with uncertainty, dismantling false identities, rebuilding inner order without shortcuts. Most people prefer substitutes, moralizing crusades, identity politics, ceremonial belonging that provide relief without transformation. Power loves substitutes. They give the feeling of awakening while keeping the structure intact. The real thing breaks the cycle because it changes the person at a level institutions cannot easily reach. Historically, whenever groups approached this kind of collective awakening, authorities reacted fast. Censorship, heresy trials, festivals to release tensions safely, even controlled dissidents who gave the illusion of opposition while preserving fundamentals. The strategy never changes. Allow symbolic rebellion, block structural transformation. That is why elites feared this symbol. It does not threaten with invading armies or rival ideologies. It threatens the architecture of control itself. It points to work that dissolves the psychological glue holding obedience together. Whoever completes it becomes harder to manipulate through fear, shame, spectacle, or manufactured desire. From the perspective of kings, priests, and modern regimes, that is intolerable. Hence the persecutions, the distortions, the aesthetic appropriations. Keep the emblem visible, block the awakening it represents. By the time we reach the 20th century, we see both extremes clearly. Secret societies preserving the Black Sun as a map of liberation, and totalitarian regimes weaponizing its image for mass obedience. Same symbol, opposite uses. And that contrast explains the central paradox. Power always wants the aura of mystery without the risk of inner freedom. It craves the emblem, but fears the emancipation it points toward. When we talk about the final paradox of the Black Sun, we're looking at a drama that keeps repeating itself across centuries. Over and over, this symbol lives two lives. One in the hands of alchemists, mystics, and initiatory traditions, and another in the hands of states, empires, and ideologies. As we said, for the mystics, it is never about spectacle. It was never about banners, monuments, or public fear. It was about the inner process. In alchemy, Nigredo, the black stage, meant the death of the old self, the collapse of everything false, the confrontation with chaos before any genuine transformation could happen. This emblem pointed inward, saying, "Enter here. Face the disintegration, face the shadow, face the unconscious. Only then, when you pass through that darkness without running, will you find what they called the rubedo, the red stage of completion, of inner sovereignty." But then, history shows us the other pattern. Kings, priests, and modern regimes see this symbol and realize it carries emotional weight. It evokes mystery, power, even fear. So they steal it. They put it on coins, on church ceilings, on flags, on the floors of ceremonial halls. They drain its interior meaning and turn it into propaganda, into myth, into a product. The Black Sun becomes part of the machinery of control instead of a map out of it. People are taught to look at the emblem with awe, to associate it with the empire, the church, the ideology, the state, anything but their own inner work. And here lies the paradox. The more visible the symbol becomes, the less people actually follow the path it encodes. The emblem survives for centuries, but the practice behind it almost disappears. It becomes decoration, archaeology, a brand for power, a hollow sun. For rulers, this is the perfect solution. Keep the mystery on the surface. Keep the emblem shining on the walls of cathedrals or secret lodges. Keep the population projecting fear or reverence onto it. But never let them ask what it actually points to. Because if they did, if they truly understood the Black Sun as an invitation to dismantle illusions and build an inner center no longer dependent on external myths, the entire architecture of control would start to crack. And that's the question this paradox leaves us with, the one history keeps dodging. What would happen if people stopped worshipping the emblem, stopped staring at it as a symbol of someone else's power, and actually followed the path it describes? Because the moment that happens, it no longer belongs to kings, priests, or totalitarian ideologies. It stops being a brand of fear and becomes what it always was: a map for freedom, for autonomy, for a life no longer built on obedience. Think about how this story plays out today. Most people believe they live modern, rational lives, far removed from kings, priests, or secret societies. Yet the same pattern repeats everywhere. We still have emblems, corporate logos, political flags, lifestyle brands, even social media trends that work the same way ancient symbols did. They carry promises, identity, belonging, purpose, power. People wear them, post them, fight over them. But just like the black sun in the hands of empires, these emblems rarely point inward. They point outward, to consumption, to ideology, to the next thing you're supposed to chase. The paradox appears the moment someone stops staring at the symbol and starts asking what it actually encodes. A political flag tells you to belong, but underneath is the question: what kind of life would you build if you stopped outsourcing meaning to parties, nations, or movements? A brand sells you identity through clothes or technology, but underneath is the question: who would you be without the logos, without the status games? The Black Sun says, turn around, stop feeding the symbol, walk the path it hides. In practical terms, this means confronting parts of yourself that systems of power would rather keep fragmented and distracted. It means sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it with consumption or ideology. It means noticing how often your emotions are steered by news cycles, online outrage, advertising, or cultural scripts, and reclaiming that energy instead of letting it be harvested. Because here is the uncomfortable truth: modern systems no longer need priests or kings to keep control. They need attention. Every platform, every brand, every ideology competes for it. Symbols today don't live on cathedral walls. They live on your phone screen. They want reaction, not reflection. Outrage, not understanding. Following the path of the Black Sun in daily life might look like this: unplugging from the noise long enough to examine your own fears and desires, refusing to let guilt or social comparison drive your decisions, questioning rituals of consumption or belonging that promise fulfillment but deliver dependence, and above all, building an inner center of gravity that isn't constantly pushed around by algorithms, trends, or authorities claiming to save you from chaos. That's why the final paradox still matters. If people stopped worshipping the modern emblems, political, religious, digital, economic, and started following the inner work those symbols often hide, they would become harder to manipulate, harder to sell to, harder to divide. And as in every century before, that possibility still frightens the systems that profit from distraction and obedience. What this symbol ultimately reveals is not just a pattern in history, but a blind spot in human behavior itself. Again and again, people cling to symbols because symbols feel safer than the processes they represent. It is easier to build monuments than to dismantle illusions, easier to wave flags than to confront the inner chaos those flags were meant to guide us through. And this is why power survives. It knows that as long as people keep the mystery external, on the floor of a cathedral, in the geometry of a castle, in the slogans of a movement, the real danger never arrives. Because the real danger is not rebellion. It is not chaos in the streets. It is individuals who no longer need the spectacle at all. People who have crossed their own darkness and come out the other side immune to manufactured fear, immune to the psychological levers of guilt, division, and distraction. The Black Sun terrifies because it breaks the cycle on which empires, churches, and modern systems all depend. Crisis, obedience, relief, repeat. It whispers that meaning can be built without intermediaries, that power can be neutralized not by fighting it on its own terms, but by starving it of the human emotions it feeds on. To live the way of this symbol today would mean 4 things. Stop consuming automatically and notice how much of your life runs on habit. Step back from collective identities that demand loyalty before reflection. Create real silence in your days to hear what actually moves inside you. And above all, learn to face the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. Because that is where the work begins. Not in symbols, but in what you do with your own shadow. Because the moment that key turns, the stage of history itself begins to change.